You spend $350,000 buying a franchise because a consultant tells you it is a great fit. You trusted the process. You did your diligence on the brand. 6 months later, you walk into a franchise expo and discover three competing brands in the same category you bought into. Brands you never saw, never evaluated, never even heard of during your search. You ask why they were never mentioned. The answer is not that those brands were worse. The answer is that they were never part of your consultant's referral network. That is the moment the whole experience shifts. Not because anything illegal happened, because something structural happened that you did not know to ask about. This video walks through the Franchise Advisor reality check. 6 items that tell you exactly how these relationships work, what the compensation structure means for your search, and how to vet any consultant or broker before you give them an hour of your time. The 6 items are: same title, different job, how compensation works, the opportunity shelf, advice versus sales, the missing options test, and vetting before you engage. Welcome to Main Street Ledger. I'm Kurt Rose, CPA, former CFO of an SBA lender and entrepreneur. We cover small business acquisitions, SBA lending, franchise ownership, and business finance, all drawn from public sources and experience. If this is your first time here, subscribe below. This is education, not financial, legal, or investment advice. Here is what most first-time franchise buyers assume when they connect with a consultant or broker. They assume the person's job is to find the best franchise for them. They assume that because they are not writing a check for the advice is neutral. They assume the short list of concepts they receive represents a genuine scan of the market. Those assumptions are understandable. They are also incomplete in ways that can cost a buyer real money and real time. The terms consultant and broker get used interchangeably. The people who hold those titles use them interchangeably. And because there is no licensing exam, no state board, no credential a buyer can point to and say that person cleared a bar, the buyer has very little to go on from the outside. What the buyer does have is a clear understanding of the structure behind the relationship. Once you understand the structure, the shortlist makes sense, the recommendation makes sense, and the gaps make sense. That is what the Franchise Advisor reality check is built to give you. 6 items. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to engage these relationships without being surprised by how they work. Item 1 is same title, different job. When someone introduces themselves as a franchise consultant or a franchise broker, the title itself tells you almost nothing useful. In practice, these 2 terms describe the same function and are used that way across the industry. There is no meaningful federal framework that separates them. No licensing requirement that distinguishes one from the other the way a real estate license distinguishes a licensed agent from someone who simply knows a lot about houses. Some people prefer consultant because it sounds advisory. Some prefer broker because it sounds transactional. Neither preference changes what is actually happening. State-level movement toward registration and disclosure requirements is beginning to emerge in some markets, which suggests the landscape may shift over time. But right now, as a buyer, the title is not the signal. The compensation structure is the signal, and that is item 2. Item 2 is how compensation works. The standard model is franchisor funded. Consultants and brokers are typically paid a referral fee by the franchisor when a deal closes, not by the buyer. This is not a secret arrangement. It is a sales distribution model that franchisors use to reach buyers they would not find on their own. The buyer pays nothing directly, which makes the relationship feel like a service. What it actually is a referral system. The consultant earns when a transaction closes. That structure does not make the advice dishonest. But it does answer the question every buyer is quietly asking: if I am not paying them, how are they making money, and does that create any pressure on what they show me? The answer is that it can, not because the consultant is acting in bad faith, but because the structure rewards completed transactions. Knowing that going in changes how you use the relationship, you use it as one input, not as independent counsel. Item 3 is the opportunity shelf. Every consultant and broker works from a defined network of franchise brands. The systems that have agreed to pay referral fees and have an established relationship with that consultant or the group they work through. That network is their inventory. When they build a short list for a buyer, they are pulling from that inventory. They are not scanning the full market on the buyer's behalf. They cannot because they only have active referral relationships with a portion of the brands operating in any given category. This is not deceptive. It is structural. A consultant working with 50 brands is not hiding the rest of the market from you. They simply do not have working relationships with those other systems. The buyer's job is to understand that the shortlist reflects the consultant's network, not the universe of available options. The franchise disclosure document, which every active franchise system is required to produce, contains 23 required sections covering costs, fees, litigation history, financial performance, and franchisee turnover. Any buyer can access an FDD for any brand independently. That document is the tool that lets a buyer evaluate options outside any consultant's network using the same framework the consultant would use. Item 4 is advice versus sales. This is the item most buyers do not think about until they are already inside the process. A consultant can be doing 4 different things in a single conversation: educating you about how franchising works, coaching you on whether franchise ownership fits your goals, introducing you to specific brands, or actively working to move a transaction toward close. All 4 can happen in the same meeting. The problem is not that consultants do all 4. The problem is when a buyer assumes they are in an education conversation when they are actually in a sales conversation. The FTC requires a minimum 14-day review period between the moment a buyer receives a franchise disclosure document and the moment they can sign anything or make any payment. That window exists specifically to protect the buyer's ability to evaluate independently before being legally bound. A buyer who understands that window and treats it as evaluation time rather than formality time is protected regardless of how the introduction happened. When a consultant is walking you through a specific brand and encouraging next steps, that is sales activity. It is not wrong. It is just something to see clearly for what it is. Item 5 is the missing options test. Sarah is a corporate manager earning $120,000 a year who decided she wanted to leave her job and buy a franchise. She worked with a consultant who introduced her to 3 concepts: a home services franchise, a senior care franchise, and a fitness franchise. She did her research on all 3, asked good questions, and ultimately purchased the home services franchise. Total project cost was $350,000. 6 months later, she attended a franchise expo and walked past booths for 3 competing home services brands she had never seen during her search. She asked why they were never part of her evaluation. The answer was not that those brands were worse. The answer was that they were not in her consultant's referral network. Sarah was not defrauded. Her consultant was not dishonest. But she is now asking a question that is very hard to answer after the fact. Did she see enough options to make the best decision she could have made? A recommendation can be honest and still be incomplete. The missing options test is simple. Before you commit to any franchise, a consultant recommends identify at least 2 or 3 direct competitors in the same category and pull their FDDs independently. Not to replace the recommendation, to pressure test it. If the recommended brand still looks like the best option after that comparison, you have real confidence in the decision. If it does not, you have saved yourself an expensive mistake. Item 6 is vetting before you engage. The answer to everything covered in this video is not to avoid consultants and brokers. Many of them are genuinely knowledgeable, well-connected, and worth working with. The answer is to run a short vetting process before the first brand introduction rather than after you are already emotionally invested in a concept. 4 questions. Any credible consultant answers all 4 without hesitation. First, how many brands are in your network? And will you share the full list before we start looking at specific concepts? Transparency here is the baseline signal. Second, how are you compensated, and does your referral fee vary depending on which brand closes? A consultant whose fee differs by brand has a structural incentive to favor certain options. That may be fine. It is worth knowing. Third, can you give me references from past clients who completed a purchase? Not people currently in the process. Past buyers who can speak to the full experience, including what happened after the consultant's involvement ended. Fourth, do you hold any credentials through a recognized industry organization? 2 worth asking about specifically are IFPG, the International Franchise Professionals Group, and FBA, the Franchise Brokers Association. Membership in either is not a guarantee of quality, but it signals that the person operates within a professional community that has conduct standards and that they have invested in their own development. In a field with no licensing requirement, that signal matters. A consultant who deflects any of these 4 questions before the first brand introduction is a consultant worth reconsidering. Here is what to take away from this video. The terms franchise consultant and franchise broker are used interchangeably in the industry. The title tells you nothing about how the person operates or how they get paid. Consultants and brokers are typically paid by the franchisor when a deal closes. That is a sales distribution model. Understanding it changes how you use the relationship. The brands on your shortlist reflect the consultant's referral network, not the full market. There is no obligation or financial incentive for them to show you brands outside that network. The FTC requires a minimum 14-day review period between receiving the FDD and signing anything. That window exists for the buyer. Use all of it. And before you engage anyone, run the 4 vetting questions. Ask about their brand network, their compensation structure, their references, and their credentials. Any consultant worth working with will answer all 4. Never ask whether your consultant likes the opportunity. Ask whether you would still choose it after seeing every reasonable alternative. If this gave you a clearer picture of how franchise search actually works, subscribe below. There's a lot more on franchise ownership, business acquisitions, and the financing behind these deals. Research the deal before you fund the deal.